I thought I knew every inch of that house. 31 years I'd lived there, raised 2 kids in it, fixed the gutters after every winter, repainted the back porch 3 times. I thought I knew my wife too, 28 years of marriage. I thought I knew her better than I knew myself. I didn't know either of them. It started on a Tuesday in March, one of those gray Indiana mornings where the sky can't decide if it wants to snow or just threaten to. My wife had driven down to visit her sister in Lexington for the week. She did that every year around this time, said it was good for her soul to get out of the cold. I'd stayed home. The shop doesn't run itself, and at 63, I don't move around as easy as I used to. I told her to drive safe. She kissed me on the cheek and said she'd call when she got in. She called. Right on schedule. That Thursday the heat went out. Not gradually, just gone. I came downstairs at 6 in the morning and the house was 52 degrees. I checked the thermostat, checked the breaker, went down to the utility room to look at the furnace the way men do when they have no idea what they're looking at. It was an older unit, the same one we'd had since 2009. I called an HVAC company that had serviced it before. The dispatcher said they could have someone out by noon. His name was Joel. Young guy, maybe 25, wore a blue jacket with his company's logo on the chest and brought a toolbox that looked like it had seen actual use. I showed him to the basement stairs, told him the unit was in the back room past the shelving, and went upstairs to make coffee. He was down there maybe 40 minutes before my phone buzzed. Mr. Whitfield. Found your furnace. Igniter's cracked. Should have you up and running in about an hour. Quick question though. Is that storage room on the right side yours? There's a padlock on it. Wasn't sure if there was another way to access the flue. I set down my coffee mug. Storage room. I typed back. What storage room? There was a pause. Then, the one behind the metal shelving unit on the right wall. Looks like the shelving swings out. There's a padlock on the door. Fairly new one. I read that 3 times. I've been in that basement hundreds of times. Thousands. I built those shelves myself in 2004 out of metal brackets and pine boards. They were bolted to the wall, or I thought they were bolted to the wall. I told Joel I'd be right down. He was standing near the far wall when I got there, pointing with his flashlight, and he was right. The shelving unit, the one I'd built with my own hands, the one I'd hung levels and holiday decorations on for 20 years. It wasn't bolted at all on the left side. There were hinges, flush hinges painted over, nearly invisible unless you were looking for them. The right side had a latch with a combination padlock hanging off it. A door. Behind my shelves. In my house. I didn't want to touch anything, Joel said quietly. Figured you'd want to see it first. I stood there for a moment. I didn't say anything. I reached out and put my hand flat against the wood panel and pushed lightly. It didn't move. The padlock held. I looked at the padlock. It was a master lock, relatively clean, no rust. Wasn't old. I thanked Joel and told him to go ahead and finish the furnace. Then I went back upstairs and sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think straight. My wife was 4 hours away in Lexington. The padlock was new, and I had no idea what was on the other side of that door. The combination lock bothered me all afternoon. I went back down twice just to stand there and look at it. I tried birthdays, hers, mine, the kids. Nothing. I tried our old address on Harlan Street. Nothing. I even tried the year we got married, 1996 forward and backward. Nothing. The lock held. Joel finished the repair around 2 o'clock, shook my hand, left me his card. Good kid, didn't ask questions. I appreciated that. I called my son that evening. He lives in Columbus now, works in IT. I didn't tell him everything. I just asked him, casual as I could manage, if he'd noticed anything unusual the last time he'd visited. He said no. Asked how Mom was. I said she was good, visiting Aunt Trish. After I hung up, I opened a beer I didn't drink and sat by the back window watching the neighbor's dog run around in the yard next door. Here's the thing about being married a long time. You develop a picture of the person you're with. Not just memories, a whole internal model of who they are, how they think, what they're capable of. You carry that picture around without even knowing it, and you filter everything through it. She bought a new shower curtain without asking. Fine. She was distant for a week last fall. Stressed about her mother. She got a second email account last year, said it was for her book club subscriptions, so they didn't clutter her main inbox. I hadn't questioned any of it. I went back to the basement with a bolt cutter I kept in the garage. It took 2 tries. The padlock shackle was thick but not commercial grade. The door swung open quietly inward into a space maybe 10 feet by 12. There was a string light mounted on the ceiling, battery-powered, a small folding table. Two plastic storage tubs, the kind with snap lids, a folding chair, and on the table a manila envelope with my name on it written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Not my wife's handwriting. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A printed document, looked like it had been run off a home printer, slightly smudged on the left margin. At the top it said Property Transfer Agreement, draft, and listed an address I didn't recognize in Clarksville, Tennessee. The buyer's name was blank. The seller's name was my wife's. Below that was a sticky note in her handwriting. V. Destroy this copy. Use the other one. D.I. sat down on the folding chair. V and D. I didn't know a V. I knew plenty of D's, but the handwriting and the casual shorthand, like two people who'd been writing to each other for years. That wasn't a business letter. That was correspondence between people who trusted each other completely. I put everything back in the envelope and went upstairs and started making phone calls I should have made a long time ago. My wife's name is Darlene. We met in the fall of 1994 at a church potluck, if you can believe it. She brought peach cobbler. I was 33 years old, and I thought she was the most composed, capable woman I'd ever seen in my life. She had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. I fell in love with that first. She had a best friend named Victoria. They'd known each other since high school, grew up 2 streets apart in the same town. Talked on the phone every week. Victoria had been maid of honor at our wedding. I liked her fine. She was sharp, funny, had strong views on college football and weak coffee. Her husband, a quiet man named Gerald, had passed away about 4 years ago from a heart attack. After that, Victoria had moved around some. I knew she'd been in Nashville at some point. Nashville is about 45 minutes from Clarksville, Tennessee. I'm not a fast thinker, never have been, but I'm thorough. I spent the next 2 days being very thorough. I pulled our joint bank statements going back 3 years. We keep paper statements because Darlene has never trusted online banking, something I'd found endearing up until about 72 hours ago. The accounts looked normal. Regular withdrawals, regular deposits from my shop, her part-time bookkeeping work at a local orthodontist's office. Then I checked the savings account. Not our joint savings, the one Darlene had kept separate since before we were married, which I'd always respected and never looked at. She'd given me the account number years ago for an insurance form, and I still had it in a file folder in my office. I called the bank directly. Explained I was trying to reconcile some estate documents, not entirely untrue given what I was finding, and asked for a balance and recent activity summary. The woman on the phone put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she told me the account balance was just under $11,000. It should have been significantly more than that. Darlene had been putting money into that account for 30 years. Even at modest amounts, there should have been well over $80,000 in it. We'd talked about it a few times over the years. She called it her independence fund, and I'd respected that. Every person should have something of their own. $80,000, down to 11. I asked the woman if she could tell me when the most recent large withdrawals had occurred. She said she couldn't give me that information without account holder authorization. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my desk and looked at the file folder and thought about the word independence. I drive a 2018 Ford F-150 that has a crack in the windshield I keep meaning to fix. I drive it to the hardware store, to my shop, to my brother-in-law's place on the other side of town when he needs help moving something. I know every exit on I-65 between here and Louisville. That Saturday morning I drove to Clarksville. It took me about 3 hours, with a stop for gas outside of Nashville. I had the address from the document, 4417 Meridian Creek Drive. I put it in my phone and followed the directions. It was a neighborhood I would have called nice. Not flashy, clean, quiet, the kind of streets where people take walks after dinner and actually wave at each other. The house at 4417 was a single-story ranch with a newer roof and a 2-car garage. The shutters were dark green. There was a bird feeder in the front yard and a welcome mat on the porch that said, "Home is where the heart is." I parked across the street and sat there for 20 minutes. A car was in the driveway, a silver Buick I didn't recognize. I thought about leaving. I sat with that thought for a while. Considered all the explanations. Maybe I was wrong about everything. Maybe the document was something innocent. Maybe V and D meant nothing, or meant something I wasn't understanding. Then Victoria came out the front door. She had a coffee mug in one hand and a phone in the other, and she stood on the porch and looked out at the street, and I watched her from my truck and she didn't see me. She was wearing a bathrobe. She was comfortable. She was home. I drove back to Indiana. I didn't call Darlene. I didn't call Victoria. I went home, made a sandwich I didn't eat, and spent the rest of the afternoon in my shop with the radio on, rebuilding a carburetor I'd already rebuilt twice, because sometimes you need your hands to be busy so your mind can work. By evening, I had a plan. I called my nephew, Marcus. No, not Marcus. That name's been used. I called my nephew Perry. He's 29, works for an insurance company downtown, and is the closest thing to tech savvy I have in the family. I asked him if he knew how to set up a recorder on a phone without it being visible on the screen. He asked me why. I told him I thought someone might be using my phone without my knowledge, and I wanted to know if I was right. He didn't believe that for a second, but he came over Sunday afternoon and helped me anyway. He's a good kid. I also talked to a lawyer. A woman named Harriet, no, again used. A woman named Sandra Kopp, who has a small family practice downtown. I'd helped her father move into an assisted living facility 2 years ago, just as a neighbor doing a neighbor a favor, and she'd told me I could call her anytime. I called her on a Monday morning and told her I needed to understand my options. She asked me what kind of options. I said the kind that involve a marriage that might not have been what I thought it was, and real estate transactions I wasn't party to, and money that had gone somewhere I couldn't account for. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Come in Thursday." Darlene came home from Lexington on a Wednesday. She came through the front door with her overnight bag and a box of chocolate bourbon balls from that candy shop her sister likes. She kissed me on the cheek. She looked the same as she always did. She went to the kitchen and started making tea. I watched her from the hallway. I thought about 28 years. I thought about the peach cobbler. I thought about all the times I'd driven home from work thinking she'll be there. And she was. And that had been enough for me. I told her the furnace had needed a new igniter while she was gone, and that the technician had come out Thursday. She said, "Oh good, was it expensive?" I said, "Not too bad." She nodded and poured her tea. She didn't ask anything else. The next 3 weeks were the quietest weeks I have ever lived through. I went through them methodically. I talked to Sandra twice more. She helped me understand what a marital estate actually includes, what separate property claims look like in Indiana, and what I would and wouldn't be entitled to depending on how things developed. She was careful. She was thorough. She didn't editorialize. Perry helped me access the voicemail on our home phone, which we still have, because my mother-in-law insists on calling it. I found 3 messages from Victoria, going back about 5 weeks. They were innocuous on their face. Catching up, asking about the weather, mentioning a recipe. But there was an undercurrent in them that I couldn't shake. Victoria's voice had a kind of brightness to it that didn't sound like 2 old friends chatting. It sounded like 2 people who were excited about something they weren't saying out loud. I drove back to Clarksville on a Thursday. I took the day off from the shop and told Darlene I was going to look at a piece of equipment in Bowling Green. She didn't question it. This time I brought my phone, set to record video, in the cup holder of the truck. I didn't approach the house. I parked on the same street, 1 property down from where I'd parked before, and I waited. Nothing happened for 2 hours. Then the front door opened, and Victoria came out again, this time dressed with a canvas shopping bag. She got into this silver Buick and pulled out of the driveway. She didn't look my way. I followed her. She went to a Kroger about 3 miles from the house, picked up groceries. Nothing unusual. But when she came back out, she was on her phone, and she sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes. I couldn't hear what she was saying. I watched her from 3 rows back. She was nodding, smiling. The way you smile when someone on the other end of the phone is saying something that makes the future sound good. I drove home. The piece that clarified everything came from a place I wasn't expecting. Darlene does the bookkeeping for Dr. Halverson's orthodontist practice 2 days a week. She's been there 11 years. A few weeks after she came back from Lexington, I stopped in to drop off her lunch. She'd forgotten it, and I'd been looking for a reason to see the office layout, which I know sounds calculating. But by that point I was thinking like that. The front desk staff knows me. I waited in the lobby while they took the lunch back to her. There was a brochure rack near the door. I wasn't reading the brochures. I was watching the hallway. Through an open door I could see Darlene's desk. She had her back to me. She was on the phone, not working, and I could see the side of her face. She was smiling the same way Victoria had been smiling in the Kroger parking lot. That same smile, that same quality of looking at something that isn't in the room. I left without her knowing I'd been there. That evening I called Sandra and told her to start preparing the paperwork. Here's what I eventually pieced together with her help and the help of a private investigator Sandra recommended. A retired county detective named Bill Ashworth, who worked out of an office above a dry cleaner's on the north side of town and charged reasonable rates and didn't seem to judge. The property in Clarksville had been purchased 14 months earlier, in Victoria's name, using a combination of funds wired from Darlene's separate account and a private loan that had originated from a third account I hadn't known existed. Opened at a credit union in Nashville 2 years ago, under a version of Darlene's name with her middle name listed as her first. $74,000 had moved through those accounts over 3 years. Not all at once. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. The timing aligned with what Sandra called structured transfers, kept below reporting thresholds, moved gradually enough not to trigger flags on our joint account. The plan, as best as Bill could reconstruct it, was relatively straightforward. Victoria would sell the Clarksville property, having established residency and made improvements over the past year, and split the proceeds with Darlene. Darlene would have staged a version of the separation herself, likely after creating some kind of record that made her look like the aggrieved party. She would have walked away from the marriage with her portion of our joint assets, plus whatever came out of the property sale. Victoria would have relocated again. They would have gone somewhere together. The sticky note had said use the other copy, but Bill found a second note tucked into the back of one of the plastic tubs in the basement room that listed 3 cities: Savannah, Asheville, Scottsdale. Somewhere warm. Somewhere that wasn't here. What I couldn't answer, and what I genuinely sat with for a long time, was why. Not the mechanics. The mechanics I understood. The question was why a woman who had, as far as I could tell, a decent life and a husband who had loved her faithfully and worked hard and fixed the gutters and never raised his voice. Why she had spent 3 years quietly building an exit she didn't think I'd notice. I asked Sandra if she'd ever seen this before. She said yes, more than once. She said sometimes people make a decision so far in advance of telling you that by the time you find out, they've already been living in the future for years. They've already grieved the marriage. They've already moved on. They just haven't said so out loud. I sat with that for a week. I don't know if it helped, but it was something to hold on to. The conversation happened on a Friday evening in early May. It wasn't what you'd picture. No raised voices. No door slamming. The weather was mild enough to have the kitchen window open, and I remember there was a cardinal in the yard, the male, doing that thing where it sits on the fence post and looks like it owns the property. I had printed out, on plain paper, a summary of what I knew. Not everything, just enough. The account at the Nashville Credit Union, the Clarksville property, the sticky note, the timeline. I slid it across the table to Darlene when she sat down with her evening tea. She looked at it. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." She said, "The basement room." I said, "Yes." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked out the kitchen window. She didn't apologize. I'm not sure I expected her to. She said she'd wanted to leave for years and hadn't known how to say it. She said she was sorry it had gone the way it did. She said the word sorry quietly, like she was testing how it sounded. I told her I wasn't going to pretend I understood it. I told her I'd been to Clarksville. I told her I'd spoken to Sandra Kopp and that Sandra had been very thorough. Darlene closed her eyes. I told her that what happened next was going to depend on how the next conversation went, and that the next conversation needed to happen with both our attorneys in the room. She said okay. I got up and went to the living room and sat in the armchair by the window and watched the cardinal for a while. I could hear Darlene in the kitchen, not moving, just sitting there with her tea. I don't think I was angry. Not the way people describe anger in these situations. I was something quieter than that. I kept thinking about the document on that folding table. My name on the envelope, in someone else's handwriting. The moment when a house you've lived in for 31 years stops being familiar. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Indiana law handles marital assets in what Sandra called an equitable distribution framework, meaning the court looks at the full picture, not just a 50-50 split. The undisclosed transfers, the hidden account, the property acquired using marital funds. All of that went into the picture. Sandra was thorough. The final settlement reflected that. The Clarksville property was liquidated. Victoria's share of the proceeds was significantly reduced after legal costs associated with her involvement in the transfer. She retained her portion of the house, though not as much as she'd been planning on. Darlene moved to Asheville in October. She sent me a text message when she arrived. It said she hoped I was doing okay. I didn't respond right away. After a few days, I wrote back and said I hoped she got everything she'd wanted out of it. I meant it, more or less. My daughter drove up from Louisville the weekend after Darlene left to help me reorganize the house. She moved some furniture around, put new curtains in the kitchen, made me throw out things I'd been holding on to for no good reason. She made us grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours straight. I hadn't realized how quiet the house had been. The basement room I turned into a proper storage area. I took the shelving apart and rebuilt it flat against the wall the way it was supposed to be all along. Bolted it in this time. I put holiday decorations in it, and spare tile, and the boxes of old photos I've been meaning to go through for a decade. My daughter asked me once what the hardest part was. I thought about it a while before I answered her. I said the hardest part wasn't the money, and it wasn't even the betrayal, exactly. The hardest part was realizing that someone can be fully present in a life while being completely absent from it at the same time. That you can share a house and a table and a bed with someone for decades, and they can be in the middle of leaving the whole time, quiet as anything, and you don't hear a sound. She nodded like she understood, even though she's 29, and I hope she never has to learn what I mean from the inside. I sold the shop in December and kept enough back to live on for a good long while. I bought a used canoe. I've been out on the river twice this spring already, which is twice more than I managed in the last 5 years. Some mornings I drive past the house on Harlan Street, the one Darlene and I lived in before this one, the one we rented our first year of marriage. It's a gray 2-story with a chain-link fence, and a mailbox that was already tilted when we moved in and is still tilted now, 30 years later. Some things just hold their position, no matter what moves around them. I don't need to be one of those things anymore. The cardinal is still in the yard. It was there this morning, on the fence post doing what it does. I've started leaving seed out for it.